Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Corning tonight. My name is Jim Siebert. I'm proud to be the superintendent here in Waukesha. I'll introduce our other cabinet members that are going to be doing some of the presentation as well. This is our Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. Her name is Jenny Gunnerman. This is our Chief Financial Officer. His name is Darren Clark. And then out in the hallway, as you came in, you saw Ryan Pat. He's our Assistant Superintendent of Student Services or Special Education. He'll do a part of the presentation. Steve Schloman is in the back. He's our Chief Information Officer. He's helped us in the design of the school boundaries. And you also saw Sharon Feedy out there. She's our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources. So we are grateful to have you here. We are going to walk through a presentation with you that's kind of a high-level overview to start of what this process is, where we've been in this process to date, and then ultimately where we found ourselves on Monday night at a board workshop, a recommendation that we made in phase 3 of this process, which we're now in, of an option to move forward with, and then some rationale behind why we recommended that option. Based on the size of the group, we never know exactly how many people we're going to have. That's where the QR code is very helpful to us. So you either have a card or you have it up here. Please scan that and then submit your questions. Those go directly to Ms. Gennerman, and Ms. Gennerman then puts them in groupings and clumps, and we'll be able to answer hopefully all of them this evening to help you get some answers that you need. Before I even start, I want to say I recognize that this process has been long. I recognize that this process has been challenging, and that we're coming to the end of the process. And so that elevates the interest and obviously the stakes in the process. But I feel really good about the process that we've conducted, that we've started talking about it back in March, that we've worked on it from April to now, that we'll continue to work on it here in 2025. And then counting up all of the sessions that we've offered, this would be number 37 in terms of the times that we've had opportunities to talk with parents, to talk with community members, and to talk with our own staff, which we did just prior to you joining us here this evening. So we're proud of that, and we'll do our best to walk through this information and then talk through your questions and answer as many as possible. So with that being said, we'll start walking through it. And this, as you may know, has been, like I said, a 3-phased process. And it started with a discussion with the board back in March. It then launched into information sharing sessions. And we had 9 of those. We had 3 for our staff and 6 for our staff and 3 for parents and community. And what we were doing in those sessions is kind of telling the story of why we think this work is important. And we'll flesh that out here in the next few slides. And ultimately how we plan to use that 3-phase process throughout the calendar year of 2025 to help the board come to some consensus around what might be the best path forward for the future of the school district of Waukesha. Over the summer, we hosted 26 different gathering input sessions. Those were broken into groups of 30 so that we could have manageable groups. People could share, express opinions on strengths, wonderings, and areas for enhancement on each option. And those actually led us to create some additional options. All that information from the summer was very helpful. We were able to use an AI app to really go through that information, synthesize it, pick out the salient themes, and it actually led to options E and F that we're going to talk about here tonight. And then ultimately, we had a board workshop on the second day of school on September 23rd, and the board requested an option G, which we'll also talk about tonight, that we created. So we have those 3 options remaining. And we now are in phase 3, which is the presenting a recommendation phase. We did, as I said, present a recommendation to the board on Monday evening. We'll talk through that tonight, as well as the rationale behind why we recommended that. And then ultimately, a decision could be made within the calendar year. So we continue to move forward with the next opportunity for that to be the board meeting on November 12th. When we started this process, we really talked about it being a long-range budget planning process. The school district of Waukesha has about a $3 to $4 million structural deficit that we address every year, essentially through right sizing of our teaching and other employee groups. We'll talk about it in a future slide. Our section counts continue to go down. Our enrollment continues to decline at about 2% per year. and it's tied directly to the decline in the birth rate. We'll have a slide coming up that shows you we're not alone in that. School districts across Wisconsin and across the United States are dealing with it. You're hearing a lot more nationally now about the decline in the birth rate, and it's also impacting higher education with closures. It's impacting the workforce, where we are having struggles filling pipelines within various industries, even with a very low unemployment rate, just because there aren't enough people. So we set out and really talked about those 4 priorities in that document, really wanting to always provide high quality education for your students and you as families. That we're very proud of our teaching and support staff. Our student achievement is on the rise. We are getting better, and it's because of their hard work aligned with our new curricular resources. We want to continue to do the best we can to offer the best opportunities for our students in the school district of Waukesha. And we believe the best way to do that is to right-size the school district, have fewer facilities, and then ultimately deploy resources more effectively and efficiently within the ones that remain. A lot of people don't always know how many schools we have. We are the 7th largest school district in the state of Wisconsin. We have 12 elementary schools. That includes our STEM elementary at the Whittier site. We have 4 middle schools. That includes the Saratoga campus for STEM. We have 4 high schools. That includes East and the Waukesha Transition Academy at the White Rock campus. We have 1 admin building, which is actually the former Blair Elementary School. We have 1 service building that's located on the Saratoga complex, along with the Harvey Phillip building. And then we have 1 lease building. It's called Pleasant Hill. It's near Gerke's Corners. It was an elementary school in Waukesha, closed in 2010, and we've been leasing it to the Richardson School, which is a private special education institution. We showed this slide early on in our work too, and we tried to take a 20-year snapshot to show people what our enrollment has looked like from 2004, 2005 to this current year of 2025. And ultimately, we've declined from 12,993 to 9,675, and we'll show you that number has now, with our 25-26 numbers, dropped into the 9,300 range. That's the number of students that are actually attending school in our brick and mortar school facilities. We also showed that when we transitioned to 6th graders going up and 9th and 5th graders, 6th graders coming out of elementary going up, that's when those numbers get a little transfixed. It's not like we had a huge enrollment increase or anything like that. That's just why they look different. But ultimately, you can see that decline, which equates to a 25.5% decline over that 20-year period. You might have watched our neighbors in Kettle Moraine close an elementary school. They've declined 20% in that same, 25% in that same range. So they're not much different than us. And what's the most interesting of all in this slide is that, I said earlier, we're the 7th largest school district. We were the 7th largest school district in 2004, 2005, and we have been during that entire 20-year period. So what it shows you is that other districts like us are declining at a similar rate that allows us to maintain and be in that same position. So this was the slide we showed where we showed we had 9,675 students in our actual brick and mortar facilities last year, where we have an overall district capacity of just over 14,000. So we then subtracted the 1156 of Blair, Pleasant Hill, and White Rock, since we're not using those as schools, and the number is 13,526. That's the number we use to calculate our capacity percentages. So ultimately, when we fast forward on the 3rd Friday of this September, we now have 9,371 students in our brick and mortar facilities. And ultimately, that provides us now with 4,861 vacant seats across the district. This is a slide that Mr. Clark uses, and when we talk about the 3rd Friday count, that's an important count because that's where 86% of our revenue comes each and every year, and it's based on the number of resident students that we have in the school district of Waukesha. That's different than the number of students who are in our brick and mortar facilities. Resident students are those who live within the school district of Waukesha boundaries, whether they go to the school district of Waukesha or they don't. So that's how we count that number. That's why that number is a little bit different at 10,396, but you can also see how it has fallen since 2012, 13,143. We've also tried to talk with people about some of the actions that we've taken in the past. So Some people have thought, like, why are you taking such a big chunk right now? Well, we have taken some attempts at this in the past. 2010 is when Pleasant Hill closed, as I mentioned earlier. In 2019, Blair Elementary closed. And in 2022, Whittier Elementary closed when we merged it with Hatfield. We were then able to sell 2 properties, Randall and Lindholm, very close to downtown and to Carroll, to Carroll University, and that allowed us to move to Blair, which had been vacant, and allowed Randall STEM to move to the Whittier site. So currently we don't have any vacant facilities within the school district of Waukesha, which we're proud of. And then we've also done, as I mentioned earlier, annual reductions in our staffing to match the decline in enrollment. We had a slide in the spring that showed 242 sections of elementary in 12-13 when we had that 13,000 number. And now we have in the 185 range, right? So we just have that many fewer elementary teachers to match the number of students that we have. And we're able to do that through voluntary attrition and through retirement. And that's our goal, to continue to be able to do that through this process to the greatest extent possible. We also have reduced our bus routes. You can see 26 bus routes less over time. So we're still running at that 75 route. Part of our district boundary reconfiguration is we believe we can be even more efficient with our busing. And then we've also tried to very much maximize one-time funding that we've gotten for ESSER, which was COVID relief money. We had just under $20 million, and we spent it on curricular resources, 37% of it. We spent the rest of it almost exclusively on HVAC and building improvement projects, so that we didn't have to come back to the taxpayers and ask for more resources. So we will be debt-free in April of 2026, which we're proud of. And we think this process is another example of fiscal stewardship and getting ourselves into a position for a viable future. We've also talked a lot about the reason that we think this work is so important is so that we can continue to do great things in both the strategic investing area as well as the student opportunity bucket. So we have standardized our curriculum over the last several years, and hopefully you're seeing that as parents. And we are seeing our results continue to get better, and we tie that directly to the use of that curriculum with very talented teachers. We've standardized our district-wide building security system. It's called Verkada. It's a state-of-the-art security system that keeps our kids and our teachers safe each and every day. While our enrollment has declined, what has increased is our special education percentage. So it's approaching 20% of our students having special needs. And so we have increased our special ed staffing year over year to meet those needs. We moved our high school to the block schedule so they have deeper time and more time to dive deeper into their learning. We're also working on a middle school schedule adjustment that will probably mirror that somewhat similarly. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, have done a lot of building system upgrades to take matters into our own hands. In terms of student opportunities, not everyone knows we have a tuition agreement with the Montessori School of Waukesha that we're proud of. Our kids can go there, sign up for it right through our enrollment process. It's mutually beneficial to both parties. Our EHE virtual school, we get kids from all over the state of Wisconsin. It's a virtual program. It keeps us positive in open enrollment, which is outstanding. We've balanced and really tried to use these as pillars, both dual language and K-8 STEM, in terms of things we want to build around within this optimizing our future process. We have 2 charter schools, the Engineering Preparatory Academy and the Health Academy at Waukesha South that are great. And then we have an increasing amount year over year of dual enrollment programming. That's where kids in high school are taking classes primarily at WCTC, but also other higher education institutions where the district pays for them to take those courses. They can get associate degrees, they can get credits that set them ahead. It's great for the kids and great for their families. We want to be able to continue to do all those things and even enhance those things where we can. And we believe the way to do that is through having more maximized facilities and a smaller district footprint. So here's the We're Not Alone slide, and we actually added Hudson this slide recently because Hudson just closed 2 elementary schools within the last 2 weeks. So it is not just a Southeast Wisconsin thing. You see a lot of the larger districts like us are on that list, and they are having these conversations or continuing to have them. Wauwatosa is in a process right now where they're talking about 7-12 and moving away from middle school. So it's not just a Waukesha thing. It can be easy to think it is when it's our community and that's what we live and breathe, but it is much more broad than just the school district of Waukesha. So ultimately, if districts aren't in this position yet, they will be in this position, and more districts will be having the conversations that we're having. And ultimately, we think by being proactive, by trying to optimize our future and create a long-range plan that creates a viable long-term district, that we will be able to create that thriving educational environment for years to come. So I'm going to let Ms. Gennerman talk just a little bit about how we use those 26 sessions in the summer to gather input.
So before I talk to this, I just want to thank everyone for using the QR code. I see lots of questions coming through. And some of your questions know that there's a lot of information that has been shared already that is on the website. So you can also access that for more information. But we'll get back to the questions at the end, and we'll look at them in themes to see if we can answer as many as possible. So thanks for using that QR code. So regarding the slide, regarding the review of information that we gathered in the summer, like Dr. Sieber said, we had several input sessions, and whether it was parents, community members, or employees, we really looked at getting feedback on the options. And then what we did after all those sessions is we looked at all of the feedback and the strengths, the wonderings, and the areas, opportunities for improvement, and really we honed in on those strength areas. There's a lot of positive comments and thought around STEM K-8 being together, and so that was just one of the examples. But we looked at all those themes, tried to consider all of them, and then use them as we move forward with different options that we brought forward.
All right, so we'll talk through the more recent options, and these are the newest ones. So option E is one that would have 4K through 5 elementary schools. You see the elementary schools, if you can see them, that would remain in existence. In this one, we would go from 12 elementary schools to 9, and we would close or repurpose or sell Hawthorne, Lowell, and Whittier. You'll see we would have 2 traditional middle schools as opposed to our current 3. And in this plan, they would be Butler and Horning. They would have a capacity of 96%, whereas the remaining elementary schools would have a capacity of 87% based on this year's enrollment. And then we would have 3 comprehensive high schools, as we have today, with a combined capacity of 72%, and the K-8 STEM at Les Paul with an uptick in enrollment, actually from 70% a year ago to 74% capacity based on this year's numbers. So ultimately, in every plan, we recommend the sale of Pleasant Hill, Saratoga, or the Saratoga complex, which includes the service building, and White Rock. Those are buildings that over the years we've had developer interest in, developers coming to us directly or going through the city, and the city coming to us. So we think those are saleable properties, and that's why they show in every plan. So White Rock is the home currently to East High School and the Waukesha Transition Academy, which is our 18 to 21-year-old special ed programming. And in this one, we would move them to Lowell. So an overall 18% reduction in capacity, or just under 2,500 seats of capacity, would be reduced in option E. However, if Easton WTA moved to Lowell, that goes down to a 15% reduction because we put that building back in play, and it would be 1,976 seats. We also, in option E, we have 3 elementary dual language sites. Our initial 4 options we currently have 4. Our initial options had 2 dual language sites. We heard from the community and from you as parents that you really value the program, and so we think we can offer 3 for the time being, right? Ultimately, we can get down to 2 based on our enrollment trends, but we're more than willing to open 3. And so in this plan, we would have Banting, Bethesda, and Higher for, again, the geographic balance, and having 3 sites. We estimate this plan to save us between $3.2 and $3.7 million, and that ultimately is helpful in our structural deficit conversation that I referenced earlier. Option F was another one that we created based on the feedback we gathered over the summer, and that was elementary schools that would be 4-year-old kindergarten through 6th grade. And so in this one, we would close Hawthorne and Whittier, and ultimately Lowell would come back into the mix. We would have the same 3 dual elementary sites. We would have the K-8 STEM at West Paul. We would have Butler and Horning as 7th and 8th grade schools only, since the 6th graders would come down. And ultimately their capacity would be at 64%, where the elementary capacity in this plan would be 90%. And the high schools remain traditional as they are today, and they would be at 72% as they were in Plan E. Ultimately, we could move east or WTA to Whittier in this plan. We wanted to show different options of where it could go. And that would take a 15% reduction, or just under 2,000 seats, down to an 11% reduction, or just over 1,500 seats of capacity. We sell those same 3 buildings, and ultimately, we believe our estimated budget savings are between $2.4 and $2.9 million with option F. And lastly, option G was one that the board asked us to create coming out of the September 3rd workshop. We did create it and presented it at the September 10th board meeting. That would be a 4K6 and then 712, a junior high school structure. And so in that, we'd have elementary capacity of 90%. We again would close or repurpose Hawthorne and Whittier. Lowell is back in the mix there. Banting, Bethesda, and Higher continue as the dual language sites. High schools continue in the traditional, non-traditional manner, I should say, of being 7-12 schools at north, south, and west. And they would be at 97% capacity, excuse me, within that plan. So what that would do is that would have us having 7-12 high schools, and that would mean in this particular plan, Butler and Horning would also be closed, sold, or repurposed. So that would equate to a 28% seat reduction, just over 3,800 seats of capacity. We would move east in WTA to Hawthorne in that plan, which would take that down to 25%, or just over 3,300 seats. And the savings in that one, obviously with closing 2 big middle schools with capacity of 950 students each, gets us up to somewhere between $4 and $4.6 million. So on Monday night, we had the workshop. We worked through this slide deck, a very similar slide deck, and the actual slide deck that we used at that workshop is on our website. You can see it under phase 3. The only thing that's different is there's workshop goals in there that we talked through, but everything else is the same. And what we did as a cabinet is we recommended that during this presenting our recommendation phase that we would move forward with option E and encourage option E to be choice. So now what we'll do is we'll talk with you about why, as a cabinet, we believe that option E would be the preferred model from our administrative perspective. That's just another look at what it is, which you remember we just talked about.
I'm just going to share a few thoughts for the rationale behind the recommendation from the teaching and learning perspective. So first and foremost, like Dr. Siebert said, we want to continue to invest in our guaranteed and viable curriculum. We hear positive feedback from our teachers of how nice it is. It's easier for them to collaborate and getting those daily lessons together. We want to continue this work. We started the work and looked at larger subject areas like literacy and math. We're still continuing on that journey and looking at some of those electives that maybe only have one section or one class throughout the district. With this recommendation, we would not be considering revising our curriculum review cycle, and that is when we purchase different curriculum materials. So when we went to school, for myself, I got a book that probably my sister may or may not have had, and as a curriculum department, the department or the district chose when they would buy a newer book. And that was really based on the administration at the time. And you could use that book for 10 years, 3 years, or even 20 years. Now with our curriculum resources, there is a digital factor to them, and so we have to consider that in our budgeting. So much like your digital access to anything you have at home, when that license expires, we have the same thing where it does expire, we need to make additional plans. So it's a little different framework now around the curriculum resources and when we can choose to update and review them. Another piece of our, from the teaching and learning perspective is just consolidating staff and resources to fewer schools, like Dr. Siebert said, having more opportunity for staff who maybe teach 1 or 2 different classes to be within the same building and be able to collaborate more often. And then most importantly, we want to continue our strong programs throughout our district. Much of what Dr. Siebert had talked about our student opportunities, but here are a few more just to highlight. So in this recommendation, 4K would continue throughout the district. If you don't know this, we do have 4K classrooms at our schools, and then we also partner with community partners, and they also offer 4K. This will continue. We may be adjusting the number of classrooms at each building or what that looks like, but the 4K opportunities would continue. In the future, I would imagine we'd do some investigating and looking more into the options around 4K, whether it's full day and half day, but right now we have all half day. We also talk about the early childhood opportunities. In the recommendation, we allowed for space, obviously, to continue, but also considering if additional space would be needed for additional early childhood classrooms. Our number of students with IEPs does continue, and our students that are our youngest learners, they have the opportunity when they are 3 to come in for services early on. And then most importantly, we want to continue with our multiple K-12 learning opportunities such as the dual language program, the STEM charter schools that we have throughout our district, the Achieve Academy, and there's so many more. Many of that Dr. Siebert had talked about on the strategic investment and opportunities for our students.
So I'm going to walk you through some of the thought processes we've had and some of the discussions we've had and data we've collected. So I thought I'd start with our considerations. And when we started this process, these considerations really haven't been adjusted much at all, but I think it's important that you understand kind of some of the goals that we had set out to attain. Obviously, we wanted to adjust our capacity to meet up with current and future enrollment levels. And there's no doubt at this point that the number of kids in the school district, along with in the state, is going to continue to decline in the years ahead. We also wanted to maintain, we're a large school district, as Dr. Siebert said, we're the 7th largest school district in the state. We have a large footprint, so we want to maintain some level of geographic balance. So when you look at the schools that we've talked about, also be thinking of the maps, the map of where our schools are actually located. One of the other things that Dr. Siebert mentioned is there's some properties that I've had a lot of contact with through the city or directly to me that developers are interested in selling or buying and then developing in different ways. And those, again, would be Pleasant Hill, Saratoga, and White Rock. So those are in every discussion we've had, every option we've had, we've kind of placed those there, and they haven't moved since then. The first thing we really set up was we wanted to maintain that commitment to dual language and STEM. Actually, the first instructional team we met with once these discussions really got going when we brought in the dual language crew and leadership and said, all right, what's the best model? What should we be thinking of? Because we really wanted these 2 programs to be something to build around. And then we talked about curriculum just a second ago, and a lot of the work that the teaching and learning department has done and the board has approved is standardizing curriculum across all grades, as was mentioned. And that really allows flexibility for any student to be able to move to whatever school and be able to walk into that classroom at a different school if they had to and be right where they were in their previous school. So again, all these things have been kept in mind as we've moved forward. So with option E, a couple of other things that we wanted to point out because I think they're important. So for East and WTA, which are located at the White Rock campus, they would stay at their current location through at least the 26-27 school year. The sale of a school building isn't something that happens overnight, just like sometimes the sale of a home doesn't happen overnight. But with school buildings, there's usually a very small niche of people who want to take on these buildings because they're not designed for turning into condos and some things like that very easily. They also have to go through their city approvals and all those things, so if I had to guesstimate the time they would actually close and then exchange a check for the deed to your property, could be 18 months. So, and again, that's if there's an active buyer out there. The Richardson School, Pleasant Hill, was closed in 2010. They serve high needs special education school. They're not part of the SDW. They're a private entity. We're a client of theirs, but we're also their landlord. Their lease runs through 26-27, so Richardson would continue to operate at Pleasant Hill through at least that time. The dual language program, we currently have 4. Under option E, we would go to 3 elementary sites, being Banting, Bethesda, and higher. All 3 already are dual language sites. The culture is already there. So we think that would be a good transition. And then also we'll talk about in the next few slides, I've been asked, well, if we move this building here or this group of kids here, what are some of the building modifications that might need to be made to make that work and make it a smoother transition? So for example, Bethesda Elementary, we've talked about their open concept for the majority of their building, and we've had lots of conversations around, well, what could we do? Because part of the problem with, or issue with Bethesda in our eyes, again, I think all of our buildings are fantastic, and if you've been in our buildings for the last several years, hopefully you can see the improvements that we've been making as we try to have the best possible facilities we can. So the options in looking at a building like this is you could just continue to operate the school as it is today. We've operated Bethesda the way it is. But we have a desire administratively to be able to have the same safety protocols at other schools as we have at, or same safety protocols at Bethesda we have at other schools. And then the opposite end of that is we could go full walls in there in hallways and really change that footprint where instead of being in an open concept, the classrooms are really, the teacher could lock in place and things like that. We met with several parent groups from Bethesda, and they came up with some ideas. So I kind of threw them in the middle. I think these two could be exclusive of each other or packaged together. Interior segmentation doors could be added around, like the library. I know most of you don't know the layout, but it would bring another level of separation to the instructional space. So these are all list price points, and these are the kinds of information that the board's asking for. We've shared these with Bethesda families that have asked. And just kind of, I think it's important you know the depth of conversation and analysis that we're going through. The next school that, under option E, that I think is worth talking about in terms of modification is Les Paul Middle School, that's served middle school age kids in Waukesha for decades and decades. We're now talking about moving a K instructional program to a middle school, and what do you need to do to especially serve the younger kids, right? So we came up with some just ideas and thoughts. Again, there's more detailed planning to be done with this. You don't have to do all these things, but I think they're pretty self-evident that they need to be done if we're going to move to that age range coming into this building. So bathroom adjustments, obviously the smaller kids need lower toilets, they might need lower sinks and those types of things. They also, a lot of our lower elementary classrooms have sinks in them. Les Paul doesn't offer a lot of sinks, so do we add casework and sinks in there so the kids can wash their hands? There's no playground equipment at Les Paul Middle School. Obviously for those lower, I would say through 4th grade, playgrounds is a key part of their recess and lunch period times. You have to add a structure or structures to that campus, and I put that price at about $180,000 to $200,000. I based it up. We've done a lot of playground equipment in the last few years, partnering with PTOs and Park and Rec and all those things. So I think that budget number is pretty solid. So again, just a sample of the kind of conversations we're having and looking at all these options. Once we narrow down the options, the board asked for a fuller analysis of what does this all mean. So until we got down to the 3 that they left on the table, we didn't get into boundaries that much because it takes a lot of analysis. So to do it for 7 options, it would be quite a task. So this is where we currently are. And we do think there's some efficiencies to be had in these boundaries. Keep in mind, these boundaries were implemented when a lot of the houses weren't even built yet. A lot of this was field at the time. So if you're looking at them going, boy, some of these boundaries seem a little weird. They might have been all farm fields at the time some of these boundaries were approved. But areas where we think where there's some efficiency, the kind of the gold colored corner, the lower right-hand corner, that's Hires attendance area. You can see that long strip down. Next to it is Hillcrest, which is brown. The long kind of peninsula or silo going down. Hatfield has the same thing. We run separate buses down to each of those little peninsulas to get a kid that might be on the southernmost boundary. So when we looked at revising the boundaries, regardless of the schools that end up being chosen, we wanted to make them more standardized and eliminate islands like this. And actually there's on the opposite side of town, the more neon colored green is Rolling Hills. Is truly an island of space there where students can live. And right above it, we're running 2 buses out to that corner of the district if there's a kid or 2 there. And those are the kinds of things we would look to clean up with new boundaries. So the board asked us to do those fuller analysis on those 3 remaining options. So here are boundaries that we drew up to fit that at the time, and I would say these are about a month to 6 weeks old now. But I think it's a good example if you look at the elementary school boundaries that we're looking at. That area of Hire, and in this one Hire is more of an orange color. We got rid of those peninsulas or silos of transportation space and made it where one route could go down there and pick up all the kids and return them. So when we talk about transportation costs, we're thinking that they'll hold flat or efficiencies will be gained. Because you're going to add busing in some areas, but I think, again, there's more efficiency out there. The area I talked about with Rolling Hills having that little island out there, we filled that all in. You don't have that anymore. So that's just a few examples. But the main thing is I look at these boundaries, and one of the goals is we developed them. We wanted to use main roads as our boundaries. We have boundaries now in a subdivision right in the middle of the block where one kid goes here and the kid next door goes to the elementary school. We really wanted to have that feel of, the kids you live by is the same school. So these are some of the things we talked about. The middle school boundaries, going down to 2 under this scenario, we really just tried to figure out what's the best way to divide it, because you're going down to 2, kind of half and half, and how the numbers work out. So we pretty much followed the river for most of the way down until you got south of the bypass. And then obviously we had to adjust to make the counts work out at each site. And the most recent ones, the one that we presented on Monday night as part of our recommendation is this one. And one of the difference, you can tell the middle school one, it got much more defined in jagged left or right, if you will. We decided that we think it's a good idea, if we can, to name specific schools, elementary schools, to go to an elementary school. So no longer would we be dividing elementary kids by a boundary that was established years ago. Half would go to Butler and half would go to Horny, or whatever the final schools would end up being. So under this one, again, the same theories are there to drive that efficiency in bus routes, use major roads, but the approach on defining that boundary for the middle school was changed. So here's the list, and again, I guess more of a holistic view of it. Let's think more than just where do those middle school kids fit. Let's think about how can we improve groups of kids moving together through and up to middle school. So in this case, it's Butler and Horny. Butler would have Bethesda, Meadowbrook, Rose Glen, and Summit View. And Horny would have Bantine, Hatfield, Hire, Hillcrest, and Prairie. And when you see these schools, we just met with some staff members. I was asked the question, well, some of these schools, there's a socioeconomic balance and all that. Don't fall for the names of the schools, because remember, their boundaries are all different. So the school you know today at this name, Summit View, their boundaries are going to be different than what they are today. So something to keep in mind as you analyze the presentation and the information you have. The boundaries won't be finalized until we meet with First Student, our bus transportation provider. So really, we'll bring in the map we want to see, we'll run this scenario, and then once we have that, we know the routes are are solid. That doesn't mean August, but later or earlier in 2026. Now I'll touch on just one building thing, and I'll turn over to Ryan Pat to talk about student service related things. So the first things that I would look to do when and if any plan is approved is develop a marketing plan for those 3 properties we talked about. Because again, the closing date for those could be certainly a year, 2 years out. So that'd be the first thing. The other thing to do is some of these buildings that we are talking about idling doesn't mean they'll be eliminated from our footprint in total. We will repurpose some of these buildings. We won't be able to sell them all, but there's some activities there. We just won't have to staff them completely with teaching and office staff and administrative staff necessarily. And we'd also continue conversations like we have with Richardson. How can we use some of these buildings maybe to partner? We've had some conversations with Park and Rec, for example, how a building can be used to benefit both the city and us as we move forward. And now I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Moving on to special education, throughout this process, there's been a lot of questions around the space for all of our students, but students who receive special education services. So in option E, we were given the information of the new boundaries, and in this plan, when you're closing 2 elementary schools, you're distributing those students, and it gave us an analysis of the section counts for those schools and the number of special education students who will go to those schools. And taking that projected data, I connected with every principal and went through the projected data and talked about the students with special education and the space that they have. And every building that would be impacted in this plan, every principal 100% said, absolutely, we have space to meet the needs of our students in each of these buildings. So that was confirmed. I said to them, I will be talking to the community, I'll be talking to parents, and I will be sharing that. And they said 100% absolutely, based on these projections, everything fits well with low numbers, good ratios that we currently have today. Just want to remind everyone that special education services, some individuals who don't necessarily know more in depth what our philosophy is least restrictive environment, where we want our students who have IEPs to be in the classroom full-time and as much as possible. There's a small percentage of students who need breakout spaces to receive specially designed instruction. When you move 30 students who have IEPs from one elementary school to another, per se, not all of those students need an individual room to fit into. Many of those students will thrive in the regular education classroom and get their specially designed instruction in that classroom and do well. A small percentage of those students may need a breakout space or a different space to have their specially designed instruction. So I just want to give everybody that philosophy, have an understanding of when you move numbers, those students aren't separated. They are with their peers as they should be and thrive and learn and receive the services most of the time in the regular education environment. When it comes to early childhood, we do have space as well for additional early childhood, and so that was confirmed also in that. Moving to student services, school choice. School choice is something that has been here in the school district that will continue. The windows for school choice and some of the charter school applications for the school district have been pushed back a month into January, where they've normally been in December for this year only, to accommodate people seeing what happens with whatever is finalized and have the ability to look at new boundaries and what is finalized to be able to make decisions accordingly. The process for school choice will continue to be what it is now, where we have a list of how students who are school choice currently are considered part of the enrollments that are projected because they are part of the school. With new boundaries, obviously that could change on some level, but there is a progression that will remain to determine who stays there and who doesn't. We currently have wait lists. We also currently do deny school choice for certain grade levels in certain schools already, and there's a process that goes through that will not change and that will remain the same. Continue to maintain bus routes with similar duration. So you heard Mr. Clark talk about the efficiencies that can exist. When we had these new boundaries, we drew concentric circles and we we got a percentage of the students who would have to be bused based on our 2 mile and out range. And the percentages, when you include some of the hazards that exist that require busing, even though they're within the 2 mile range, etc., were very similar to this year's percentages around the number of students who are bused. So with some of those boundary changes, again, as Mr. Clark showed, and the efficiencies that exist, we feel that we're in a really good place transportation-wise. And importantly, our standard is what are our longest routes running now? We will not exceed that next year. So we're not going to put students on buses for any longer amount of time than they currently are in for this school year, and that will be a factor determining routes.
So just to summarize, we're looking to reduce some costs, and we talked about this a lot, and some of you I know have been in some of the sessions I ran during the summer. I think the foundational question being asked to the board is, there's a cost to running all these buildings, even though capacity-wise, we're nowhere near needing them all. And can those dollars be allocated to student services, and resources for staff, and those types of things? So we think we can our estimated cost saving, I think it was mentioned earlier, would be between $3.2 and $3.7 million. The new facility footprint would allow us to recalibrate our capital improvement needs and to have our existing budget dollars go further because we're maintaining fewer sites. So we think we can go more and do more in-depth work than we already are. And then, as I said before, some building modifications, and I gave the examples of Bethesda and Les Paul, some building modifications are going to be needed more than likely. But one of the benefits of option E in our eyes is you're not doing a lot of changing to grade configuration within the building except for K-7.
At the workshop as well, we kind of tried to provide just a high-level overview. We will build this out a little bit deeper in terms of, we did make an administrative recommendation, as I mentioned in October. If we stay on track with our plan, the board could potentially make a decision in either November or December. Could be beyond that, that's a big decision. And we will continue to provide monthly updates in that standing spot we have at the full board meetings as we go through the year. And as Mr. Clark said, we would start to actively pursue those 3 properties that we believe are the most saleable. We would be able to implement with confidence option E for the 26-27 school year. Continue those monthly updates and monitor our enrollment, monitor the changes that are happening within option E during 26-27. And then ultimately, by 27-28, we would consider option E to be the start of the work that we have to do. We don't think that there's any plan that gets us 10 years of not making any changes as an administrative team. We think when we show you the upcoming slides on enrollment and how we project that to continue to decline at 2% per year, that we will have to have further conversations. However, what we like about option E is it leaves a number of other things still on the table. So we still could talk about K-6, 6th graders moving down. We still could talk about 7-12 high schools. We could have a conversation about how many high schools should we have in the schools of Waukesha footprint. We could have all of those conversations coming here in the future after taking a little bit of a break, as we know we can't just keep talking about this consistently and continually because we know that it's stressful for you, it's challenging for our staff. But we think, and we'll show you, that by 29, 30, 31, we believe we could be poised again to be talking about any of those options that I just mentioned, as well as how many elementary schools are we going to need for a future that out through 2035 is a consistent 2% decline, and we'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute.
So we've been running, just to give you background on our projections, we contract with a company called Applied Population Laboratory with partners with UW-Madison and we run that study about 4 or 5 times. So we have a third party come in and say, what's that enrollment trend looks like going forward? So we use that data as a baseline, and really what I can look for from that report is what's the percentage trend that we're going to move from 2 to 2.25% is kind of what We've come down from that information. But then we also apply our existing enrollment and cast those forward based on changes that we normally see. And these are the numbers that we've come up with. So I'm just going to give you some examples of data points that we've calculated out, and so you can see the exact data that we're looking at. For 4K5 level, you can see in 24-25, that's a known number. We had 3,932 kids. Again, this is brick and mortar kids or on-site students. The 25-26 number, the 3,782, that's a live number. We just had our third Friday of September people. We do that every year. DPI requires that, and that's how our funding gets calculated. But then we apply, like I said, our known enrollments by grade, and we come up with our data to what's it going to drop over the next several years. All the backbone of that being the APL, or applied laboratory information. So when asked, one of the questions we're being asked now is, when do you think we'll be back talking about elementary school? As Dr. Siebert said, I think around that 29, 30, 31 school year is when, capacity-wise, I would think it would be a topic of conversation. But ultimately, it depends on what the Board of Education thinks at that moment and whether the administration sees that as the best move. We've also talked a lot, if you looked at the options that we've been presenting and ideas, and hopefully you can see from this range of different ideas the depth and number of things we've looked at over time. But this is grades 7 through 12, projecting out. This does not include STEM because, again, I'm working on the assumption the STEM is now at West Paul, right? 24, 25, and 25, 26 are known numbers. But the question was, all right, when would we fit into 3 high schools that are 7 through 12? And again, we come out about the 29-30 school year of work when we think that would happen and when those conversations, or when you could actually implement something like that. So it'd be 29-30, 30-31. And then we did the same thing for grades 9-12, but this was the question of when could you go to 2 high schools? When would we fit? And whether that's the great decision at that time, that's not the point of this graph. But again, the timeline sets you in at around that 29-30 fiscal year or school year.
So as we said, on Monday night we had a board workshop. The slide deck for that workshop, like I said, is on our website. It's the same as this with the exception of the workshop goal slides. And we recommended that we move forward with option E. We had some very good discussion. And I have to say, we have a number of our board members here tonight. They have been very engaged in this process the entire time, dating back to when we started talking about it in March until today and beyond. And so it's a big, big decision. It's very important work for the long-term viability of the school district of Waukesha. And I've said it multiple times that there aren't very many school boards that are willing to have this kind of conversation and willing to make this kind of decision. So we should all be very grateful that we have people in place that are willing to look at this and have put the time and effort and commitment into it that they have. So with that being said, the reason we, again, like this is we think it takes us in the right direction. It takes us from 12 elementary schools to 9, which is a big first step. It takes us from 3 middle schools to 2. We think that's a big first step. And then it also leaves, as I said earlier, a myriad of options on the table for us to consider for implementation in 29-30 or 30-31. So with that being said, that's the end of our formal part of the presentation. Ms. Genderman has been working through your questions, so we'll start to answer those, and let's see how much we can get through. Okay, yeah.
So thank you again for using the QR code and putting in questions. We had over 200 so far, and some of the submissions had more than one question. So I've grouped them into themes. We'll circle back around curriculum, transportation, class size, and staffing, and then some about the building. So the first one is, can the district stay status quo?
Can the district stay status quo? Okay, so that's a good question. The answer is yes. The district could stay status quo. However, we did show a slide in a couple of our presentations where we look at the cost of the status quo. And so by 2030, we have a 2% decline over 5 more years. We'll have 10% fewer students, right? and we will have, with that 3 to 4 million structural deficit, we just used the 3 million conservative number, we'll have $15 million less in resources. And then when we forecast it out another 5 years, so to 2035, that would be 10 years, now we're up to $30 million conservatively in reduced resources because of in cuts that we would have to make to balance the budget. And we're also down to around 7,800 students in our brick and mortar facilities, which is roughly the size of Elmbrook today. And so when you look at Elmbrook today, Elmbrook has 5 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools. They don't have 23 facilities like we have, right? So there is a cost to the status quo. So is it possible? Yes. Would it be a drastically different looking school district if we didn't do something now? The answer to that in our mind is also yes.
There's a question about offers on the buildings that were either talked about of potentially selling, first, or that we get people interested in those, or we already have people who have indicated their interest. So are there any offers for any of our buildings right now being considered?
There are not. We do not have any current offers. We have had interest. We have had people call, we have had people inquire, and once this process comes to a conclusion with a board decision, that is part of our plan, as Mr. Clark said, to more actively market those properties, and then we could have the potential of offers.
Is there a final decision made right now as far as the options?
Yeah, we've faced that question, I would say, dating back to the start of the process. And we feel really good about this process, and there has been no final decision ever made by us, by the board, by anyone, right? We have really kind of tried to, we started with 4 options, and those 4 options aren't even on the table anymore. We created new options based on feedback, and one of the option that we're recommending, E, is all based on feedback that we got this summer, and that's what we're doing. So there is no predetermined pathway, and ultimately we have tried to use this year-long process to really dive deep, use your input as parents, use our staff's input, use our community's input to help us think differently, to help us think deeper. And ultimately, I can't tell you that option E as it stands is going to be where we end up, right? We had some really good conversation at the board workshop, and because the board is so invested and is thinking so deeply about this, we could end up in a different place still. So I think you should feel good as parents that we are listening, we are working together, and we are doing our best to come up with what's the best solution going forward.
Several of our buildings are slated with the word repurpose. Can you talk about what that would look like with more specifics?
Sure. So in this option E, for example, we could go from 23 district buildings to 17, right? Because we could sell 3 and we would sell or repurpose 3. So when we say repurpose, one idea is the Richardson School, right? If we sell Pleasant Hill, we'd like to find another Waukesha location for them to be in. They're a good partner to have. If we sell White Rock, we need a place for Waukesha East and the Waukesha Transition Academy to go. We've had conversations with the city, right? Is there things we could do together in a facility, right? At some point, the YMCA is going to leave downtown Waukesha. Is there some way that we could partner and use one of our facilities for something like that? That's not anything set in stone. It's a conversation we had one time, right? So there are a number of different things that potentially we could do with a building. Maybe we use a building for a professional development center, an e-achieve testing center, a summer school site, some type of city programming. I'm not sure. So the goal that Darren talked about is not to have vacant buildings sitting all over the community. It's either to put them into some kind of good use in partnership, most likely with another entity like the city, or to sell them and have them repurposed by someone else, or for us ourselves to repurpose with something like another school such as East or Richardson.
All right, we're going to give you a rest. I'm going to take a few curriculum pieces, and then Ryan, I'm going to go to you for transportation. So there were questions around what strategic planning is being done for the financial needs that we need around curriculum. And so I wanted to just share that in the last year or so, given all the work around our curriculum resources, Mr. Clark and my department have worked together to solidify when we would make those larger curriculum investments. And really, he's worked to put aside a certain amount of money so that when it comes time for that year to make a larger investment, we have money from our fund balance that can be allocated in addition to our annual budgeting that we would use. With that, when we have larger curriculum purchases, we would really focus on that and have minimal other purchases to just help balance the work and also the financial piece. There was a question about what are we talking about when we're talking about curriculum alignment. And so as we talk about that guaranteed and viable curriculum that our staff is using, and we talk about aligning that, years ago, teachers were self-curating their lessons. And so if I taught 3rd grade and Dr. Siebert taught 3rd grade and we were both teaching math, it doesn't necessarily mean we were hitting the same math topics, not necessarily near the same time, and definitely not an opportunity to collaborate among each other as 3rd grade teachers across the district. At one point, there were different curriculum resources used throughout the district, and that made things very challenging, especially when students are moving between schools within the district. And just a clarification of when I talked about 4K earlier, we do have all day full 4K. I misspoke, but I wanted to say is that some of the locations around us are offering 5-day-a-week 4K, so that might be a consideration moving forward. So Ryan, I'm gonna give it to you. Can you speak to the 1 and 2 mile walking concept and how that would be applied to each school?
Yes, so currently, our schools have their boundaries, and if you live in that boundary, then there is a 1 and 2 mile, well, 1 mile we wanted to show how many students live within a more favorable walking distance. That was our goal with the new boundaries, and a graphic of 2 concentric circles, the 1 mile circle, then the 2 mile circle. Anyone within 2 miles of the school generally is considered a walker. Anyone outside 2 miles is considered to be bused and has to be bused. Within the 2 mile radius or circle, there are hazards that can exist, so train tracks in Waukesha, possibly having to cross a major highway, the bypass. So things are considered, and busing is provided if there is a hazard that exists as well. So that's how we determine who is bused on that. Really 2 mile and out is for surely busing, and 2 mile and in is considered any possible hazards. Let's say there's not a sidewalk and they would have to walk on a country road. Age matters. Students who are older and are more able to take care of themselves and manage crossing the street, of course, etc. All of that is considered. Note that every year for busing, it changes. We have students who do move up to different schools, and so that changes routes because they're no longer on a route, especially in some of those outlying areas. So it really drastically changes year to year, and we put that puzzle together based on all these factors.
So with that puzzle changing already year to year with these potential changes, when would families learn about their bus information for this upcoming school year if we were to implement changes?
So once we get the new boundaries finalized for whatever options and schools and all of that are finalized, the boundaries obviously drive all of the busing. And once we have that, we'll begin the work to project it as quickly as we can, who for sure they would have busing 2 miles out, and then start to bring that in from each of the schools and the new boundaries and look at what hazards exist. So I don't have a time frame. I can tell you that the boundaries are obviously our priority to get out right away, and then from there we'll work with our bus company to project possible busing, and that would be a projection probably to start based on my statement of from the time that we project to the time that school starts. People are going to move in, people are going to move out. We have school choice that hasn't happened yet, so we have to be cognizant of all those things, and there might be some, again, projections that can be helpful, but those may change over time based on all those factors.
But really, typically, they're all set at the end of August before the school year starts, correct?
Correct. The bus company, for any of you who experience transportation now, they basically tell you to check right before the first day of school because changes are happening that often up until that point.
Will the charter schools receive busing moving forward?
That's still up for discussion. We don't, as of right now, have any plans for our charter schools to receive busing. And so the same processes that are in place for transportation right now will exist for our charter schools and the new boundaries and the new buildings that STEM may be in and whatever that looks like.
All right, thanks. We're going to give you a break. Ms. Beatty, can you come up and talk a little bit about class size and will they increase and to what?
So class size, for the projections of the capacity that you heard, they use 22 for second grade and younger and 25 for third grade and above. That is what we use for the projections for capacity, and that is always our goal every year when we are staffing. So when we look at sections, for example, if we said 25 and above, but I have 2 classes of fourth grade at 27, just because it's above 25, I'm not just going to add a third teacher. So it's our goal and it's our average, but students don't come in packs of 25 and 22. So some students, as you know, might have a class of 17, and some might be sitting at its class size of 27. So that would continue. So the class sizes really wouldn't change depending on the option.
Will regular education teachers, special education teachers, and even special education aides continue to have a position within the district?
So for staffing the district, what we have to have happen first is the boundaries set, and then we go through the school choice process. So once we go through choice and we know where the students are attending, that's where we start to look at then class size and how many teachers we need. K-12. So we typically staff secondary in, students are selecting classes already in January. We're figuring out what classes they are taking, and we staff the secondary usually in March. My schedulers are creating those master schedules usually over spring break, so we can determine staffing for the secondary. Elementary, we're usually staffing in April once we have a better idea of where the students are attending, school choice is settled. So typically we staff elementary in April, and that would be ultimately where I would know how many sections we have, how many teachers you need. The retirement deadline is February 15th, so then I know how many people would be retiring, and then I just work with those numbers to determine staffing. A question had come up as well, so what if I have more teachers in sections? So what if I have too many teachers? Our handbook outlines a reduction in force process that we would then go through in order to determine our staffing needs.
What are we doing to attract and retain teachers?
We have a really strong professional development program here in the district, so as we are advertising and going to recruitment fairs, we are getting ourselves out there as a destination place to work. Everyone that I meet with when I hire them in, I shouldn't say everyone, but the majority are very impressed with our professional development and our organization, and ultimately our support for our teachers.
Right down here. So, Mr. Clark, can you just share with the group how the buildings were determined and why would maybe one school come on or off as we adjusted the plans?
Sure. We went through, we had about a list of 10 things in our earlier presentations of things we looked at in each facility. And obviously, geographic balance is something we touched on several times. Other things were what's the building's capacity? Because a larger building tends to give you more flexibility than a smaller building. What's the best accessibility? We went into pickup, drop off. And I know a lot of our schools don't have great pickup and drop offs in general, but we looked at the number of parking spots, how much green space do they have, Can you do Sunday if an addition was wanted on a site? Could we put an addition on? So we had a set of criteria, and maybe we should have included it in the slide deck, but if you go back to the older ones, you can see all 10 of those. And it was really what, in my eyes, to summarize it, what was the flexibility that each building provided us? Then there was the geographic balance. So in some areas of our district, we have clusters of schools more closely together than others, and that was a factor as well. We looked at, I looked at the campus we're on right now. There's value to having Bantine and Horning next to each other, but what value you put on that when you're talking about what schools to select. So it was a multi-tiered look at it, and we just kind of made the ultimate decision of which ones met the most of those criteria that we laid out.
I'm going to go to you. That's all right. Thanks. So again, we really appreciate the questions, and we've been looking at it as they come in. We have several of them. Again, we'll try and answer as many as we can in these themed areas. If there's any individual one-off questions, we can talk, at the end, but there are several of those, so those we won't hit specifically about specific families and students at schools. But can you speak to the before and after school care? What will that look like now compared to if something were to move forward?
Before and after school care, do you know more about that than I do? Maybe not. We have it, right? We have before and after school care at most of our sites. Generally speaking, it's with Park and Rec through the city of Waukesha. If we have fewer sites, the goal would be to make sure that we have it, if possible, at all of our sites, and that would be the goal. So part of this process is ensuring that our schools are at capacity and as full capacity as they can be. And then secondarily is making sure that we have resources that are similar across the district to the greatest extent possible, whether that's before and after school care, 4-year-old kindergarten being similar. All of those pieces are important to us in this process.
All right, thanks. Our next question is about potential timeline for approval. So if the board were not to take action within this calendar year, and it goes into January or after that, would the implementation timeline be adjusted?
I think that's a good question. I think that really depends on what the final plan is. We've already said if we were to end up with Plan G, for example, we thought we would need administratively at least until 27-28 to implement that. We feel confident with E that we could do it in 26-27 if that's where we end up. And I don't know that a couple of months, because of E not being as complicated, would be a factor for us. So I think we basically have to see, give the board the time they need, and give them the information they need to make the best decision possible, and then ultimately determine, can we do it for 26-27? And I would say most likely yes.
Can you speak to a little bit of, with the timeline that we had shared, how would you recommend people plan for future? Like we had a question earlier in the other session about with my students here, how would they make decisions moving forward?
Yeah, so are you referring to like when I'm talking about 29-30?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I would set that aside for now. That's something that I think we need to continue to talk about, but I would base my decisions as a parent. Of course, you have ultimate decision making in your child's education on whatever we come up with right now, right? So whatever we're going to implement if we are going to implement something for 26-27, you make your decision based on that, knowing in the back of your mind, I guess, that ultimately we could be talking about K-6 or 7-12 or 2 high schools going forward. But that's what's got to be hard. I understand the challenge in that as a parent, and I also understand from our perspective trying to be able to offer all the things that you want as a parent and not being able to do that in the amount of sites that we currently have going forward.
What is the plan for the revenue generated from the sale of a building?
So the savings we talked about, the 3.2 to 3.7, for example, in option E, that will help us with the structural deficit. That doesn't necessarily help us do additional things, but it will help us not do things, and there's a strength in that. Revenue from buildings that are sold, generally speaking, is put into the fund balance and then used for one-time expenditures, such as what Ms. Vanderman talked about, how we're stocking money away for curriculum renewals or facility projects that are important to get done, or the boiler that blows that you weren't planning on, things like that.
Has it been discussed that Corning would be housing the STEM school?
It has been discussed. It's probably started over the summer in our sessions. We had a lot of conversation and a lot of you in this room were in our sessions. People talking about, have you considered it at Corning versus Les Paul? We've had board members ask about Corning versus Les Paul, and we had some good discussion about where should the STEM school be at the workshop on Monday. So part of our responsibility as the administration is to take the feedback from the board, and then ultimately we will work up an option E that shows a Corning being the K STEM versus the Les Paul based on their discussion. And our goal is to give them all the information that they need, be able to give them guidance on questions that they have, give them information that they need, ultimately make recommendations like we did. But it's not certainly to deliberate with them or to debate with them. They're the ultimate decision makers, and it's our job just to give them what they need in order to make decisions. So yes, it has been discussed.
Thanks. And your response there also kind of tells a little bit more about the relationship, because there's many questions or statements about why this building or why that building. So many things are being factored, but ultimately we're providing as much information as possible. So a few more questions, because it is getting to 7:20. Just want to make sure we get as many as we can.
Sure.
But can you speak to the location of the EDA building for administration at Blair? Is it being considered that a different building be used, or why is that not on the list?
Sure. So when we had Blair sitting vacant since 2019. We used it for 1 year with Butler 6th grade during COVID, actually the first year that I came here, because we were doing some referendum work in Butler, and so we had 6th graders there. And we might have used it for one other thing before I got here. Montessori maybe used it for a year or something, but because of its location in the city of Waukesha, we don't believe there's any interest, and we haven't had any interest, or hadn't had any interest when we made the decision to move there. So we think it's a building that serves a good purpose with us being there and the board meetings being there. It has ample parking for the meetings that we have and the staff development that we have there. So ultimately we have not discussed that we would move somewhere else, just because we don't know what we would do with Blair, and we don't think it's a saleable property.
All right. Can you speak to how the district is going to support teachers and staff in this implementation if we are going to implement something as soon as next year?
Sure. So this is going to be a different process than some of you that might remember 2022 when we merged Whittier into Hatfield. We were using 42.5% combined capacity of those two schools. It totally made sense to put them together. We merged those staffs. We did a lot of collaboration with those staffs and team building. We used the two-principal model to try and bring that school together. But it takes time, and it takes time, and you're not doing the Hatfield way, and you're not doing the Whittier way, right? It's different. So I think what Mr. Clark was trying to say before is when we redraw these boundaries, the school that you know today is no longer exactly the same school, right? Because there are going to be, when we close other schools, those kids need a place to go to school, and so every school is going to look different, and every school is going to develop a slightly different culture. But the biggest thing with that, ultimately, is the teacher in the classroom. And we are loaded with incredibly good teachers, and even if they end up going to a different school and they work with a different group of teachers or a different principal, they're very strong. And we will build team. We've already been working with our principals on managing change. We're not waiting till something happens. We're trying to give them the skills to be able to work with people, and this is high order change that we're talking about. So at the end of the day, you have to trust that the people that are in front of your kids today are going to be the same people, if not very similar people, with the same type of work ethic, the same time of commitment, same kind of dedication, and same kind of love that they have for your children. And they might just be in a different building teaching somewhere else, or your kids might be in a different building with somebody else, but they're all really, really solid.
Can you, on that note, can you speak to if, with the new boundaries, will any students, especially those at the higher grades, like 5th grade or middle school, will there be any grandfathering in of those older students to stay in the building if they are pre-boundaried and supposed to go to a different school?
So as I talked about school choice before, it is a priority to keep students in their school if they're when the boundaries change. We feel that with the capacity that exists, there'll be some opportunity. So currently, if you're a current student on school choice, you are considered, as I said, part of the enrollment. If we have to make some hard decisions, individuals who are already there come first. Then if a sibling would apply for school choice at that same school, they would have the next tier of opportunity, and then any student who doesn't have a sibling there but applies for school choice is our third tier. So those are what we consider moving forward. I want to make that happen, and we'll do everything we can, but I can't guarantee it. It depends on with the boundaries and what happens. But as it stands here, we feel that for the most part it'll happen, but I can't guarantee it as I stand here. But we'll go through the process, and it is part of our thought process around those students who have been there all those years, not to have them change, and we'll do everything we can to support it.
Can you keep the microphone for another minute and talk about, are all our schools in the district ADA compliant and wheelchair accessible?
All the schools in our district are not ADA compliant, or I don't believe they're all wheelchair accessible, but they're all grandfathered in based on when they were built and how they operate as a school. So we've made a multitude of modifications. Mr. Clark would have more knowledge of any modifications we've done, but a really good example is Prairie Elementary School. To move up to the second floor, there's not an elevator in the building, but it is grandfathered in to accessible for students and to be a school, but it's not always easily accessible, and sometimes it's not for certain students.
There's another, just want to circle back to the question around option E. So is this the final option? Is this what's going to happen for next year?
I'm not sure. I mean, we recommended it. We had some good conversation on Monday night around option E. Like I said, the board had some ideas of some things that might be tweaked in that we will provide to them for their consideration. And then ultimately, it's up to the board to tell us if that's what they like, or if they'd like us to pursue something else or be interested in pursuing something else. But we'll continue to work in partnership with them and provide them the information that they desire. See if you have anything more?
Les Paul has, they have their own drop-off and pickup route. So would this be changed if STEM is there?
One of the things that we've talked about with STEM is some of the challenge in pickup and drop-off. So those of you that are Les Paul parents, you know that. And with STEM all driving currently, that could be a problem. We've been successful in figuring out pickup and drop-offs. For example, at Whittier, we created a good situation there that's very workable. So we do our best at Les Paul. The difference is Les Paul has buses that pull up by St. Luke's. There aren't any buses at STEM, right? So that's another area that you could use. You could run a loop through the big parking lot. You could also run a loop through the auxiliary Fayette area that's got the big black fence around it. There's a lot of different options there that we could pursue if the K-8 STEM ends up going there. And We have worked with the STEM schools and STEM parents before on parking, so we could do that again.
We're going to stay on the STEM topic because there's several about them. If STEM were to be at Corning, would the boundaries for Corning change? Yeah, if STEM goes to Corning,
Yeah, it's Les Paul and
Yeah, they're the exact same boundaries, yeah, there would be no difference. So what we showed you is what we'll most likely end up with.
and I think maybe part of the question is maybe getting at Corning would not remain as an additional middle school separate than STEM. Is that accurate? So we would
Yes.
go have the two schools.
Yeah, in option E, we go from 12 elementaries to 9, and we go from 3 traditional middle schools to 2. So Horning or Les Paul would be a K-8 STEM only. There would be no regular education students there any longer. Not that STEM isn't STEM, it's just a charter school. But that has been a point of confusion, I think. Like some people may have thought, well, in the summer when we talked about it maybe going to Summit View, I think people thought, well, I'll just stay at Summit View and do regular ed, and STEM people can be there too, and that's not the vision. The vision is it would just become a K-8 STEM, and that's the only program that would be offered there. And we think that's actually part of the thing that appeals to us with that is we think we are primed for 2 middle schools, right? And it still leaves all those other options on the table, but we know for the long haul, we don't need 3 traditional middle schools. But we also know we've made significant investments in those middle schools, and so from our administrative perspective, it's important to put those into use in some way.
Another question about boundaries. When would we look at the high school boundaries, or when would parents be able to see what the high school boundaries would be based off of this work?
Based on what we're talking about, what the board's considering in the couple of months ahead, the boundaries of the high school stay exactly as they are. There will be no changes to attendance areas. As we presented it under option E, any conversations related to high school boundaries areas would probably not come until the board's starting to look at options of what your high school footprint will look like 4 or 5 years from now.
Will teachers be offered an early retirement or severance package?
We do already, in general, have early retirement package for teachers. So right now, we would have to look at numbers to see if we would need to offer anything different to encourage additional retirement. It's just going to depend on what plan we end up with and what we have already for current retirements and the number of staff we need.